So, hi folks, good to see you. And I have the privilege of introducing tonight's speaker. So let me just launch right into it. I think most of you know Dr. John Capucci. He's the Stephen Jaroslawski Chair in Religion and Conflict at Assumption University, Windsor's Roman Catholic University. In addition to his chair duties, John also serves as Principal and Vice Chancellor of Assumption, where he's worked on academic revitalization over the last few years. He holds a PhD from Carleton University. Yay, I do too, great. A Master of Arts from Queen's University in Kingston, and an Honors Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Windsor. Okay. John has an active research agenda, as most of you will know. I recognize some faces from his talk last year when several of you were here. He has publications, refereed publications in contemporary Jewry, Canadian Jewish Studies, field work in religion, Journal of Muslim Minority Affairs, and the Journal of Shia Islamic Studies. And his most recent article on anti-Semitism in Windsor appeared in the Journal of Contemporary Anti-Semitism just last year. He has a forthcoming article appearing in the Bulletin for the Study of Religion. His research has been discussed by local and regional media, and beyond that. I've seen references to it in American Catholic publications, and perhaps even more broadly than that. John has also taught courses from across the humanities and social sciences, resulting in top teaching scores. He's also served on graduate committees, mentoring a future generation of academics. My God, he's so young, and he's mentoring a future generation of academics. He's actively involved in interfaith initiatives in the community, particularly with Jewish-Christian relations. Under John's leadership, Assumption became the second Canadian university to be admitted as a member of the Council of Centers on Jewish-Christian Relations. John's dedication was recognized fairly recently by his fellow principals and presidents, leading to his selection as chair of the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities in Canada. On a personal note, let me add that John was once one of my students, and I take enormous pride in what he's done as a scholar, and also in the vision and the leadership that he has shown as principal of Assumption University. I think it's quite remarkable. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming John Capucci.
Thank you, Doc.
Can you take the microphone, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks, for that very warm introduction. I'm very honored that you were able to do it. Dr. Brooks is actually one of 4 members of my advisory committee that I have as the Jaroslawski Chair, and I'm very happy that he's able to join that committee. He's joined by Dr. Roy Amor, another professor of religion, Karen Rosen, who's the president of Congregation Bethel, and Mary Heath, who sits on the Windsor-Essex Catholic District School Board of Trustees. So I'm very happy to have such a very talented group of advisors. Before I begin, I want to thank the Jaroslawski Foundation, because without them we wouldn't be here today, and we wouldn't have this chair in religion and conflict. We are one of the oldest Jaroslawski chairs in the country, founded almost 20 years ago. And it was founded by a generous donation from Mr. Jaroslawski of $1 million. That was matched by the Basilian Fellows of Sandwich for another $1 million. So we're very lucky that we have this endowment, and we're able to do these types of activities in the community and have these kinds of discussions. I also like to thank all of you for attending tonight. I know there's a lot of things going on in the community, and we're wrapping up the semester, so it's a busy time, but I do appreciate you joining us for this very interesting talk on the research study that I just conducted this past year. So I'm going to do it in 3 parts, actually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the Baha'is. Who are the Baha'is? Because I think a lot of people, particularly in the Western world, really don't know who they are. And I think people are nodding their heads and saying, yeah, we want that discussion, good. And then I want to talk about the issues that are erupting in Iran, or have been going on in Iran, with regard to the Baha'i community. And then I want to talk about my study, what I actually did to try to contribute to the scholarship. So that's what we're going to do, and then at the end, we'll open up the floor for some discussions. We have a smaller group tonight, so it's great, and we can have that short discussion. So I'm just going to switch and put this on the PowerPoint show screen, and then we'll start talking about the religion. So as I mentioned, the Baha'is, who are they, is a good question. And why is this important, or what is this all about? Well, that's pretty much what we're going to talk about. The Baha'i faith was founded in 19th century Persia. Exactly 1844 was the year that it was founded. And it's a religion that is monotheistic in nature. So it believes in one God, in the same vein that Judaism, Christianity, Islam also believe in one God. But the Baha'is believe in something called manifestations of God that have come out throughout not only the centuries, but throughout the millennia as time goes on. And these manifestations are individuals, they're people. And they are a way of showcasing God's message and showcasing God's light to humanity. And they've come at specific times in history. I'm going to talk about that very shortly. The most recent manifestation of God, according to the Baha'i faith, is the Baha'u'llah, okay? And the Baha'u'llah, again, 19th century, I'll talk a little bit about him later on, but his name means glory of God in Persian, and he is the most recent manifestation of God. Now, you're saying, well, how many of these Baha'is exist in the world? It's a good question. There's probably anywhere between 7 to 8 million Baha'is. And it's funny to watch scholars argue, not that they argue often, but to see them debate about the actual size of the Baha'i community. I've seen numbers as low as 5 million, I've seen numbers high as 13 million, but the one that I seem to see a lot of is the one that's around 7 to 8 million. And the Baha'is are located in pretty much every country on earth. They don't form a majority in any country. The only country where, in a few countries, they're the second largest religious group. One of them is Iran. And that's actually where their largest Baha'i community exists today, and I'm going to talk about that. Another country where they form a substantial proportion is in Panama as well, because a lot of missionary activity that's gone on over the years. So I don't know if you can see this too well, but I can pause it a little bit. The Baha'i theology, if we could use that phrase, I know it's kind of a Christian phrase, but you can see that there's God over here, and then throughout the millennia, has sent his light throughout. And that all these religions are part of this same divine essence. So in other words, you see this sign if you can, this represents Hinduism. Hinduism, Judaism, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, and the Baha'i faith at the top. They are all part of the same essence because they're all coming from the same God. So in other words, these divisions that you see between Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever it might be, is something that is, I think I'm going down, is something that actually is not what the Baha'i faith teaches. The Baha'i faith stresses unity, the unity of all religions, that all religions come from one divine source, God, and then throughout the ages they've been manifested to humanity at different times for different reasons. And the Baha'is don't really say we know why they've come at those times, but they say they have come at those times. As I mentioned, the unity of religion, it's not only religion the Baha'is stress, it's also the unity of humanity as well. That's something that's important too. The Baha'is stress that all humans are united, that we're all one people, that these divisions that we've created based on religion, race, ethnicity, nationality, creed, gender, these are all false creations. We need to stress the fact that there is a unity of humanity. And I want to point out something that the Baha'i faith stresses quite, and you can't see it too well, but I'll point it out, is the equality between all men and women. Men and women have equal stations in this religion. And with respect to the other religions that are mentioned over here, that has not always been the case. You can see that in pretty much all the previous religions I mentioned, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Judaism. Women have had to fight in order to achieve some semblance of equality. And in some cases, there is no equality in those religions. I'm not judging, I'm just pointing out a fact there. But in the Baha'i faith, all women and all men have the same status. And something really unique, I'm thinking of Galileo now, but the Baha'i faith stresses the harmony between science and religion. Usually science and religion have a restraining order on each other.
They have to be 50 feet apart, or else there's going to be conflict. But the Baha'i faith says no. Religion can inform science, and science can inform religion. This dichotomy that exists doesn't necessarily have to exist. So those are some of the tenets of the Baha'i faith that I have before you. Now, I want to talk a little bit about God, because the Baha'i faith, as I mentioned, believes in one God, that God has many names. They believe there are 99 names of God in Islam, and the final 100th name was finally revealed, and I'll talk about that later on. But Baha'is believe that God is, as I mentioned, benevolent, omnipotent, and eternal, but they don't really understand all the nature of God in its entirety. So in other words, that God is a little bit beyond human understanding. And so is things like the soul and arguments like that. I'm just thinking of Christianity. In Christianity, when somebody asked me, they said, John, how come the Catholics and the Orthodox Christians don't get along? I know the story about the Pope, but what else, like theologically speaking? I said, well, there's a doctrine called the Filioque doctrine, which says that the Holy Spirit comes from the Father and the Son. That's what's believed in Catholicism. But in Orthodox Christianity, it's believed that the Holy Spirit only comes from the Father. And this person said, yeah, but who cares? And moreover, who knows what that story is all about? Why are we fighting about something like that? Well, in the Baha'i faith, really, these kinds of ideas aren't really known. And people accept that. Rather than trying to debate about them and try to understand things, that they really can't. There's that recognition of that. I should note that Baha'is have a prayer life as well, and have prayers that they say every day. Somewhat similar that you might see in Islam and Judaism that recommend or require certain prayers to be said every day. Christianity, not so much. Now you might have seen this. Has anybody seen the ring stone before? Right here. I've seen this on a ring, actually. One of my colleagues in Ottawa, when I was studying at Carleton, was a Baha'i. He taught me a lot about the Baha'i faith. Interestingly enough, we taught world religions together. And he told me, he says, John, there are many paths to the top of the mountain. They're different paths. They're not wrong, they're just different. And that was kind of a way of thinking about the world religions and how the Baha'is see world religions. So there's different paths. There's not one path that's going to lead you off a cliff, or one path that is going to lead you to a place called Hell. Not that. There is different paths. This ring stone, as I mentioned here, this line represents God uniting pretty much everyone. At the top, right over here, you have the representation of different, so there's 3 lines here. One represents the Bab, one represents Baha'u'llah, and I'll explain that later on. But these lines represent God, the manifestations of God, and humanity, and the linking of everyone together. So this interconnectedness is something that's central to Baha'i theology. And as I mentioned, that last name of God, remember there's 100 names of God, and the 99th name would reveal by that special figure that would come out in the middle of the 19th century. This is the name, O thou, the glory of the most glorious. That is the representation of his name in script. Now, where did this religion come from? It came from 19th century Persia or Iran. Iran changed its name in the 1930s. Does anybody know why Iran changed its name in the 1930s? Steve?
Wasn't it a Nazi? Wasn't it from the Germans? Because Iran was that they should, Persia, they said, is not Aryan enough. And so they should go to Iran because that sounds more Aryan.
Yeah, Iran means land of the Aryans. And in the 1930s, the Nazis pressured the Shah at the time to change the name from Persia, which was a name that existed for millennia, into Iran. So it's somewhat new. That's why we're using Persia, because this took place in the 19th century. In Islam, particularly Shia Islam, there's 2 main branches in Islam. There's the Sunni branch, which comprises about 85% of Muslims, and the Shia branch. The Shia branch comprises the 10%, and then there's some other smaller branches. In the Shia branch, which is actually most prominent in Iran, Most Iranians today come from the Shia branch of Islam. They believe that there were 12 successors to the Prophet Muhammad, 12 imams. They call them imams, leaders. The 12th imam, which is the last one, disappeared. He disappeared around 874 CE, Common Era. And he went into something called occultation, which is the Western translation of an Arabic word. But that didn't mean he disappeared and is gone. He's hidden from the eyes of man, but still exists and still guides the world. But one day he would return. And it's believed when this 12th Imam, who, by the way, his name is Mahdi, when he returns, he will come also with someone else. Does anyone who knows who that someone else might be? Starts with a J, and it's not me. It is Jesus. The Imam Mahdi will be returned with Jesus as well. He disappeared into what's called the Greater Occultation in 941, and since then that's pretty much been it. But if you talk to modern day Shia Muslims, they'll say, no, the 12th Imam is still alive, this 12th Imam is still around, but what has happened is God has increased his lifespan. Anyways, what has happened is when the 12th Imam comes back, there will be a conflict, but then there will be an age of peace that will come forward. So that's where we are. Now you're saying, okay, that's the Muslim Shia belief. Yeah, you're right. What's the problem? Well, what's the problem is, in the Baha'i faith, the 12th Imam has returned, which, for lack of a better phrase, is seen as heresy by the Iranian government. And this lies the problem. So the Baha'is believe that the 12th Imam actually came back, and his name was Sayyid Ali Muhammad al-Shirazi. Al-Shirazi means he came from the area of Shiraz in Iran. And he came from a merchant family, a very wealthy family. But in 1844, and this is when the Baha'i calendar begins, he declared that he was the 12th Imam. And he took the title the Bab, which in Arabic means the door, the gateway. And this began nearly 200 years of conflict between the Iranian governments of the day and the Baha'i religion. Now, I should note, the Baha'i calendar actually consists of 19 months, each with 19 days. If you do 19 times 19, it's 361, and they add an extra 4 days so it links up with the Gregorian calendar. But since this time, 1844, Baha'is have been persecuted, they've been murdered, they've been exiled, and I'll talk a little bit about the Bab himself. The Bab was executed by firing squad. What happened actually is the Persian authorities had enough of the Baha'i faith. There were a lot of assassination attempts going on. We talked about this in the hallway with my colleagues here. And whenever there was an assassination attempt against the Shah, the king of Iran, they blamed the Baha'is. So they were scapegoated, and they still are scapegoated today in Iran. And this has gone on for quite some time. So what happened was they lined the Bab up before a firing squad. And it's interesting enough because there were Western audiences watching and there were Persians. When they fired the first volley and the smoke cleared, the Bab wasn't there. Instead, they found him back in his room, dictating his last will. They brought him back, they fired again, and they killed him. So that's when the Bab was killed and died. But people believe that this was the Baha'is believe this was a miracle. He is seen as a martyr, and his body was eventually smuggled out of Iran and now is buried on Mount Carmel. And I know somebody mentioned to me, they says, John, I went to Israel and I saw this beautiful mountain, and there was and I said, yeah, that's what we're talking about tonight. This is the Shrine of the Bab, which, if anybody been to Israel, will see this on the slopes of Mount Carmel. So I want to pause before I jump into the next part, because I know I said a lot. Are there any questions about what I've covered so far? And I'll get some water. So if we wanted to do a test, everyone will understand? After the Bab, now, I'll ask a question actually. In Christianity, let's relate it to Christianity. Who was seen as the precursor to Jesus? Thank you, Lana. I knew you were going to get that one. You had to get that one. Sister Lana is very correct. Okay? John the Baptist was the precursor to Jesus. And he said that someone greater than I will come forward soon. I'm not even worthy enough to clean the dust off of his sandals. Right? Well, the Bab had something similar. Not exactly the same, but if we're going to talk to a Western audience, they would understand the John the Baptist Jesus relationship. The Bab also said that I am only a gate, hence my name. I am only preparing the way for someone greater than me to come forward to teach this new religion. And that individual is the Baha'u'llah. Now, I should mention something for those that are Baha'is in the audience. I did not include a picture of the Baha'u'llah. It is inappropriate to display a picture of the Baha'u'llah or the Bab in people's homes. They do not display those pictures, so keep that in mind. Yes, if my students would raise their hand right now and say, well, if you go on the internet, there's going to be pictures. I know there's going to be pictures, but it's inappropriate to display it. So in deference to the Baha'i community, the picture of the Baha'u'llah or the Bab are not included in the presentation. But who is the Baha'u'llah? Well, his birth name, I should say, is Mirza Hussein Ali. And the fact that he had this Mirza title tells you what? Does anybody know?
His family descended from the Prophet Muhammad. Like nobility.
Yes, nobility more. Did you want it more on the nobility side?
Learned person.
A learned person, yeah. So if he had, in the case of the Bab, see the Bab, you're right about this one. The Bab had the Sayyid title. Sayyid means a descendant of the Prophet. Mirza means more of a learned person, a noble, or something along those lines, but you're right. So it is a title of prominence. And he came also from a wealthy family as well, just like the Bab did. And actually he was born a little bit before the Bab. Now, he declared, this is a big date, in 1863, he declared that he was the one that was predicted by the Bab, that the Bab was talking about him, and that he was the one. And he was the one that was going to deliver a new revelation, a new testament, so to speak, to humanity. Well, obviously, at the time, Persia was in control of the Qajar family, the Qajar dynasty, Qajar. And they weren't too happy with this whole idea. A lot of it is politics. See, religion, when you clear religion aside, you'll see politics behind it often. And the thing was, well, he's claiming that he is another descendant, another manifestation, another testament. We don't like that. Why wouldn't they like that idea? Not only is it about power and control, which I already mentioned, but why is this a problem from a theological perspective if you are a Shia Muslim government?
So wasn't it because Muhammad was supposed to be the final prophet? There was
That's right.
None to follow.
That's right. So in Islam, it's taught that Muhammad is the seal of the prophets. That's it. No prophet will follow him after he passes. So this whole notion of prophets coming after in the form of the Bab or the Baha'u'llah, this is a problem for the ruling Shia authorities. So the Baha'u'llah and his family were exiled. This is usually the punishment that was taken. He was also imprisoned in something that was called the Black Pit. He was exiled first to Baghdad, and then Constantinople, which was in the Ottoman Empire, and then Adrianople, which was in Western Turkey, and then finally in the prison town of Akko, which is now in Israel. And this is where he spent most of his life, in exile. He actually was almost killed multiple times. In reference to the Baha'i community of Iran or Persia at the time, whenever there was an assassination attempt on the Shah, they would blame the Baha'u'llah and his followers. And there were persecutions, there were murders, there were executions, there were all these things that were going on. So if you can see this little map over here, this is where it originally started. Where's Iran right now? Right around over here in Tehran, and then started to spread westward. And then eventually ending up in what we call modern-day Israel, but previously known as Palestine. And this was under the Ottoman Empire's control. So that's where things were centered, and that's why the center of the Baha'i faith is in Israel. And that's going to cause another issue when we talk about the Islamic Republic government today. So what did the Baha'u'llah teach? Well, first and foremost, he did publish a book called The Most Holy Book, and it's a book of laws to tell the Baha'is on the teachings of the faith. But he also spent time writing to major political leaders and religious leaders. Napoleon III of France, Queen Victoria, Pope Pius IX here. He eventually did die at the age of 74 of a fever, and he's buried in the Baha'i mansion in Accra, which is now Akko, or formerly Akko. But he said something that there would be no other manifestation of God for another 1,000 years. So we would have to wait another 1,000 years for that. Many people, how many people have, anybody been here? Yeah. You've been here? Yeah. These are the Baha'i gardens that you would see in Haifa, Israel. And this little area right here is the mansion where the Baha'u'llah is resting. But they're beautiful gardens. And you'll notice this star with 9 points on it. That is the symbol for the Baha'i faith. Similar as the cross would be for Christianity, the Star of David, the crescent for Islam. Why 9? What is the significance of 9 in the Baha'i faith? What's your name?
Andrea?
Andrea, tell me.
The major world religions, like just the different manifestations, how they're all part of being Baha'i.
And there's 9 of them.
Yeah.
So there's been 9 manifestations, and they are all represented over here. And I'm going to talk about the manifestations next. Also, 9 is a significant number from a mathematical perspective. Why? Why is 9 a significant number from a mathematical perspective? It is the largest
single-digit number.
There you go. So it represents a sort of wholeness. When the Baha'u'llah passed away, he was succeeded by his son, and then he was succeeded by his grandson. And what happened in 1963 was the establishment of something called the Universal House of Justice, which exists today. And this is essentially the headquarters of the Baha'i faith, but they're also in charge of legislating anything that the Baha'u'llah didn't mention that they could legislate on. This is interesting enough, but every 5 years, the NSA elects 9 members to serve on their board. And these individuals are selected from what's called NSAs. So you're saying, well, what is all this NSA and stuff here? The Baha'is don't have a church. They don't have a synagogue. They don't have a temple. They don't have a mosque. They don't have a gurdwara. They have something called local spiritual assemblies, LSAs. And LSAs are found all over the world, many, many cities, including Windsor. The LSA in Windsor was founded in 1979, and after the Iranian Revolution, and I'll get to that in a second. So they elect 9 members to serve on their LSA, and then the LSAs elect members to serve on the National Spiritual Assembly, which every country usually has one, including Canada. And I was in contact with the NSA when I did this project. I wanted to make sure that everything was above board. Picture of the Universal House of Justice, also in Haifa. You probably, those of you that have been have probably seen it. I want to talk now about teachings of the Baha'i faith. The Baha'i faith believes something very unique. When you think about the Abrahamic faiths, such as Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, they teach about revelation, that God has given a revelation to humanity. Okay. In the Baha'i faith, there is revelation, but it's something called progressive revelation. In other words, that there's an evolution to the revelation. That we started off years, centuries and centuries and centuries ago, millennia ago, with a revelation. But then it evolved. And then it evolved again and again and again. And it continuously evolves to suit the needs of a specific period of time. Now, I should point out, and this is a very important, oops, we're frozen now. There it is. This is what progressive revelation means. You can see in the Baha'i faith, there's God. And then over the centuries, he's passed a message to Abraham, to Krishna from the Hindu faith, to Moses, Zoroaster, the Zoroastrian faith, to the Buddha, to Jesus, to Muhammad, to the Bab, to the Baha'u'llah. And then eventually, 1,000 years from now, there will be another manifestation of God right over here. But this is what the Baha'i faith teaches. That the revelation that God is passing through is not a book that stays stagnant forever. It actually evolves over time. So you can see, and I pointed this out over here, it's not necessary for all people to accept the Baha'i manifestation of God. In other words, the idea that there is no salvation outside of the Baha'i faith is something that doesn't exist. So this is something very important to understand. I want to pause and see if there's any questions. No? I'm going to have a big test after this presentation. Now, I mentioned that the Baha'is don't have a church. A church in the sense of a place where they have to go to worship every Sunday or Friday or Saturday or anything. What they do have is something called a house of worship, which exists in several cities across the globe, although not every city. And it's supposed to, this was something that was mandated by the Baha'u'llah, but it was to emphasize the spiritual unity of humanity, but also was a place where everyone can gather. And not only gather, but also receive health care and education and support for seniors and charities and things like that. So there were supposed to be all kinds of these houses of worship that were supposed to come up. But keep in mind, in these houses of worship, it's forbidden to preach, to play musical instruments, or have altars. So you're saying, well, where are they located? Well, I'll show you a beautiful picture of one that's just outside of Chicago. Has anybody seen the one in Wilmette? This is actually a Baha'i house of worship. And it was the first one established, I believe, in the world, certainly, of course, in North America. And this represents the one in North America. But they have been founded all over the world, from Chicago to Uganda, to Panama, to Chile, to Cambodia, Colombia, Kenya, and so on. So it's quite interesting to know. Here's actually a beautiful one. This one's in Chile. It kind of looks like a jellyfish in a way. But these are some of the Baha'i houses of worship that exist. And the Baha'u'llah wanted that every city should have one of these. Now, this is what gets people nervous about the Baha'i faith. And actually, we were talking about the Nazis early on. The Nazis actually didn't like the Baha'is either. The Nazis didn't like anybody, but really, the Nazis, they didn't like a lot of groups, but they didn't like Jehovah's Witnesses. Does anybody know why they didn't like Jehovah's Witnesses? Jehovah's Witnesses, yeah, go ahead, Mark.
They're not nationalists. They won't pledge allegiance to a government.
There it is, perfect. Yeah, they're not nationalists, they won't pledge allegiance to the government, so they won't swear an oath to the Third Reich. These people are dangerous. So they were persecuted as well. The Baha'is in Nazi Germany were also persecuted. And the reasoning for that was that they were internationalists. And that was dangerous. They were internationalists. And internationalists, when you say that word, if I had a professor of political science in the audience, he might be able to tell me, Dr. Brooks, if someone was an internationalist, what would that mean to you?
A communist.
There it is. There it is. And that was the fear, that they were communists. And we're going to get to that in a second. The Baha'is believe, again, in the unity of humanity, which is something that I think is very important, particularly nowadays. And they don't believe in these divisions based on tribe, city, nation, religion, all that stuff. They says it's time to put away those differences and recognize the unity of humanity. The Baha'is actually believe in a universal language and a universal government and a universal currency. And in fact, the inspiration of the United Nations itself was a Baha'i inspiration. It was inspired by the Baha'i faith. So when people see this thing, unified world order, they get nervous and think that the Baha'is want to get everybody under one roof, much the same way that the communists wanted to do. But obviously there are some differences at play here. Now, just so we kind of know, and then I'm going to get to Iran issue, how does Baha'i relate to the other religions? Well, first and foremost, there really aren't many dietary laws in the Baha'i faith, with the exception of the exclusion of alcohol. So alcohol is forbidden. Any type of intoxicants are forbidden in the Baha'i faith. Food, pork is permitted and all that, so they didn't accept that from Islam. It's interesting, if you think about the lineage here, you have Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Baha'i faith. Judaism, no pork. Christianity, yes pork. Islam, no pork. Baha'i, yes pork. So nobody's really unified on the pork issue, but nonetheless, that's what it is here. As I mentioned, there's no alcohol, no illegal drugs, and people should stop smoking. The Baha'u'llah was very much against drugs. Keep in mind, this was a time in Persia when people were using opium galore, so this is something that was very concerned. Premarital sex is a no-no, and homosexual relationships. So anything outside of, any type of sexual relationship outside of marriage is forbidden. Divorce is allowed, but the individual couples should try to reconcile. So you can see a little bit of Islam, a little bit of Judaism, a little bit of Christianity, all kind of mixed up. And it's interesting, it's very interesting to see this type of relationship. Now we get to what my study is all about. So I've given you a good background. I want to talk about where I fit in all this. Years ago, when I was studying at Queen's, I was doing my major research paper on democracy in Iran, particularly during the time of a president named President Khatami. President Khatami came out in the 1990s, late 1990s, and he was seen as this reformer. And anyways, I was studying him and learning about that. Then I heard about this new religion called the Baha'is, and how they were always persecuted. And I said, so what's so special about this Baha'i faith, and why are they constantly persecuted by the Iranian government? And I learned more and more about them. Then when I went to Ottawa, I met a lot of Baha'is because Ottawa has a sizable Persian community, and I understood more about the faith. And of course, I met that colleague of mine who's a professor at one of the colleges there, and he taught me more about the Baha'i faith and to kind of understand it a little bit more. But I still couldn't understand why a religion that stresses unity, stresses commonality between humanity, would be persecuted so ferociously by the Iranian government. And it's just not a product of the 1979 revolution. It's gotten worse. But it's been a product going back since its inception in 1844. So what's going on in Iran? That's what I wanted to look at here. As I mentioned, it's been persecuted since it started. In Iran, Baha'is are forbidden to practice their religion publicly and privately. So this is not something like, okay, you can't proselytize your religion in the streets. In other words, you can't try to convert people and say, do you want to be Christian? You want to be Catholic too? No, it's not about that. It's publicly and privately. Baha'is have been arrested. They've been subjected to torture, executions. Their houses have been raided. They've been murdered on sight. And interesting, they have no standing before the Iranian courts. So if I'm a Baha'i and someone does something wrong to me, and I go to the Iranian courts for help, the Iranian courts say, too bad. We're not going to help you. There is even the belief that, and I put this word moba, which means that Baha'i blood could be spilled without any penalty. So if someone were to murder a Baha'i in Iran, it would be passed aside. People would say, I don't know what happened over there. Yeah, maybe they got in a fight, who knows, who cares? We're not going to worry about it. So they have no status whatsoever. And within the Constitution, and I'm going to get to that later on in my study, they have no standing whatsoever as well. I want to talk about this because this puts it into perspective here. These are 10 teachers who were essentially Sunday school teachers. They taught the Baha'i faith to kids. So we would call them Sunday school teachers in Christianity. In 1983, they were rounded up, arrested, sent to prison, tortured, and then executed. One by one, they were sent to the gallows. And they were lined up from oldest to youngest. The youngest is right here, Mona. If you've ever heard of Mona's story, she was 17 years old when she was executed. And the judges and the executioners say, look, just don't say you're a Baha'i and you can go free. Say you're Muslim and you're done. Just go, we'll go send you home today. Well, they all went to the gallows saying absolutely not. They said they wouldn't trade their faith for the entire world. Mona is very interesting. You know what she did when she got to the gallows? She kissed the hands of her executioner, and she kissed the rope that was going to put around her neck, and she was executed. This was in 1983. Yeah. So this is just one example of what's going on in Iran. And this was in 1983 after the revolution happened. As I mentioned, Baha'is are not only persecuted, they're tortured, sent to the execution chambers, gallows, but they also have difficulty finding employment. If your employer knows that you're a Baha'i, you can be fired. You can't get licenses to open up a business. Your business can be ransacked at the will of the government. And here's the one that is completely outrageous. Not to mention the other one's outrageous, but this one is outrageous beyond belief. Baha'is are forbidden to attend universities or colleges. Because when you apply to an Iranian university, you have to open up the exam and you have to check a box. And the Iranian government recognizes 4 and only 4 religions. Islam, which is the official religion, and then the 3 religions of the book, so religions that are precursors to Islam: Zoroastrianism, Judaism, and Christianity. There is no other box. If you do not check one of those 4, you cannot gain admissions into any Iranian university. So in the eyes of the government, the whole point of this, and by the way, as I mentioned, raids and surveillance, and this includes homes and workplaces. I want to go back to this university one, and obviously I'm very sensitive about it given my profession, but I had a debate with someone about this, an Iranian who was very proud of Iranian and apparently supported the Iranian government. This was in Ottawa. And he said to me, "John, you keep complaining about the Baha'is, they don't have access to universities." I said, "Yeah, that's a problem." He says, "They got universities." I said, "Where?" "They have them underground." I said, "Underground where?" "They do it in secret, they teach in secret." I said, "Really? They teach in secret? Well, what about this? When they taught in secret, look what happened. Their schools, they were executed one by one. So this is a problem that human rights organizations have significantly complained about, and I don't blame them for doing that. And lastly, shrines and cemeteries. Cemeteries have also been desecrated and destroyed at the hands of the Iranian government, including, I believe it was the Bab's house in Shiraz, if I'm not mistaken, was completely demolished and I think turned into a mosque. So even cemeteries of Baha'is are desecrated. There was one human rights observer that said, look, the persecution of the Baha'is begins from cradle to grave. End of story. And unfortunately, that seems to be the case of the Baha'is in Canada. There are Baha'is in Canada, by the way. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But the Baha'i Canadian community is very unique because there is a shrine in the Baha'i faith in Canada. It's in Montreal. And has anybody heard of the Maxwell House, which is located on Mount Royal? It's considered a shrine because when Abdul Baha, who was the Baha'u'llah's son, visited Canada, he came to this house, which was owned by 2 very prominent Canadians, May and William Sutherland Maxwell, who were actually, I believe, both born in the States, but settled in Montreal. And when he came into this house, he said, this is my home. So he stayed over there, and the Baha'i faith has declared that house, the Maxwell House, a shrine. And he did a tour of Montreal, and I believe Union Station in Toronto, and preaching about the Baha'i faith and so on and so forth. So the Baha'i faith has a special connection to Canada. The first Baha'i came in 1898. She went to a convention, I believe in Chicago, but I could be wrong, Edith Maggie, and then she came back to her home in, does anybody know what town? It's not far from Windsor, 2 hours up the 401. London, yeah. So that's the first Baha'i in 1898. This is a picture of the Maxwell house, or the Baha'i shrine now, and you can see it says Baha'i shrine, or Sanctuary of Baha'i. There are about 35,000 Baha'is in Canada, give or take. And the Baha'is are in every province and every territory, which is quite unique. What I'm very proud with the Canadian government about is they were the first government to legally recognize the Baha'i faith in 1949. So they recognized them as an entity, a legal entity, which is not bad, okay, not bad. Now, I should point out there's a very sizable group of Baha'is, particularly in northern Canada, who are of indigenous background. And that's something that you keep in mind. So there is some synergy between the Baha'i faith and indigenous spirituality. And last but not least, the Windsor LSA, so Local Spiritual Assembly, was founded in 1979. and it was following the Iranian Revolution. There's not many Baha'is in Windsor. It's a very small, quiet group. I've been able to meet with some of them, and they're very welcoming and supportive of so far of the study. But the largest probably I would assume, be in the Toronto area. I could be wrong. I know the headquarters for the National Spiritual Assembly of Canada is in Markham, which is just outside of the GTA. As mentioned, the leadership, there is no Baha'i Pope, so it's not like Catholicism. Instead, there's the Universal House of Justice, which consists of 9 people, and then following that, there's a National Spiritual Assembly, then there are local spiritual assemblies. There's also regional spiritual assemblies that have just kind of popped up since 2002. They would be right here. This is another issue that gets a lot of trouble, that gets the Baha'is into trouble with the Iranian government. No clergy. No clergy. So as I mentioned, when you pull away religion, and then you see politics behind it, clergy, and this is going to get me into trouble, but clergy have played a large political role in the history of humanity. They've had an enormous amount of power. Priests, rabbis, imams, bishops, archbishops, popes, they've had a lot of power. The Baha'i faith teaches that there is no clergy, which emphasizes democracy and diversity. There is no priesthood. So when you live in a country that is essentially a theocratic government, which is Iran, that is ruled by individuals who are clerics, this is a problem because you are challenging their authority. And that's why, I've talked to a lot of Baha'is, and in my research it's come out that, I said, why are they persecuted? Well, we don't believe in the mullahs. We don't believe in the imams. We don't believe in the ayatollah. We don't believe in any of that. We believe everybody has a right to their own religion, has the same status. So this is a source of tension that exists in Iran today. By the way, this is the National Spiritual Assembly that was elected. As you can see, diversity is something that is very much stressed when electing individuals, and everybody elects the individuals. And so the research study, what I tried to do here is I wanted to know, and no one's done a study like this, so it's good, but at the same time there's a lot of pitfalls. I wanted to see what Iranian Canadians, that's why I brought the Iranian Canadians in, what Iranian Canadians thought about the treatment of Iranian Baha'is. In other words, did they kind of say, yeah, well, if the Iranian Baha'is would agree with the Islamic Republic and, stop preaching and stop whatever they're doing, I know they don't preach, but things like that, then it'd be okay, or no, this is a serious issue. I wanted to know what the Iranian Canadians thought. So I did an online survey using the survey software Qualtrics, and it was a short survey, about 10 to 15 minutes. I got some demographic information, and then I asked survey questions. And I'll go through, there was 5 major survey questions that I went through. And then at the end, if people wanted to leave their email, they could leave their email, they could get a chance to win one of the 20 gift cards for Amazon. So it's a little incentive. Now, I want to say something about the study before I get into the results. When I presented this to my advisory committee, so every Jaroslavsky chair has an advisory committee, not supervisory, advisory. Dr. Brooks and I looked at each other, and I think you said, Steve, this is going to be Dearborn all over again. And I knew what he meant. Years ago, I did research in Dearborn, Michigan, and I was studying the Iraqi Shia community of Dearborn, Michigan for my doctoral dissertation. And I was a young scholar at the time. So I did the study, and I was trying to get to interview people about how religious they were since coming from Iraq. Keep in mind, this is just after the Second Gulf War. And I had trouble finding participants. And I said to myself, what is going on here? Something is going on. And then you hear from the grapevine what was going on. What was going on was that I was being perceived as a spy for the American government. And I you don't forget something like that. And I remember they told me, they said, John, well, they kind of think you're working for the Americans. And I said, doing what? Well, you're a spy, you're working for the FBI, you're working for NSA, I said, I'm doing what? I thought I was working for the Roman Catholic Church. But no, that was the perception. And they said, John, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the Iraqi people that you're interviewing. Here they have, with respect, they got a white guy, dressed kind of nicely, knows a heck of a lot about this community, walking around Dearborn, asking questions about religion. How would you feel about that? And I said, well, I suppose you're right. The truth of the matter was that at the time, the FBI was going to mosques in Dearborn, Michigan, asking questions. Who's causing trouble? Who's talking out of line? Who's doing this? Not only was the FBI running around, but just before his execution, Saddam was sending spies around too, because his fear was if the Americans were to invade Iraq, which they did, that the Americans would get support from the expatriate community in Dearborn, Michigan. Who's who, what's what, all that kind of information. And those people would be more than welcome to help the American government. So when Stephen and I said this is going to be Dearborn all over again, we were both right, unfortunately, because it did happen again. By the way, when I presented this to my research ethics board at Carleton, I was kind of all shooken up, right? I was a young researcher. And she said, John, whatever you do, make sure you write a paper on that instant, that whole story. And I did. I wrote a paper. It's called The Surreptitious Scholar. And I talked about how I eventually won the trust of the community over. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that I wasn't American. I was Canadian. And also they liked the fact that I was Italian because they said, well, Italians got good food, they got good soccer, I said, okay, good. And that helped me win over the community. But otherwise, it was a serious matter. Now you're saying, well, how does that relate to this study today? Well, years later, it popped up again. I sent the study out to various LSAs across Ontario, and I sent it to some media outlets, Iranian media outlets in Toronto. And then one of the editors says, John, I'm really trying to promote this study for you. I says, thank you. But everybody seems to think you're working for the Iranian government. And I said, well, you got to pick. It's either the Iranian government or the American government. You can't be working for both. But again, there was that whole thing all over again. So I did note it in my REB application that, again, there's this perception of spying. But aside from all these stories, there was people that were very concerned about participating in the study because they didn't know much about the identity of the researcher. Now, maybe if I played the Catholic card a little bit better, it might have neutralized things, but it also showcases the fear that the community had with taking part. So on that notion, to take part in this study, you needed to be identified as Iranian Canadian. So either one parent or you were born in Iran. Be 18 years of age, which is standard. You have to reside in Ontario or have at least one place in Ontario. And you have to have some kind of knowledge of Iranian Baha'is, something. I should note that most people that took part in the study were very familiar with the treatment of Iranian Baha'is. Now, the demographics. Does anybody want to guess which was the largest religious group that participated in this study?
I'm going to guess Muslims.
You would guess incorrect.
I'm surprised.
You would guess incorrect, which is a big surprise. There were a lot of surprises with the demographics. I'm building it up, right? There was a lot of surprises with the demographics that I had to do a little bit of thinking on my head to figure out how this all played out. I asked individuals their standard questions, their gender, their religion. So they could choose Muslim, Baha'i, Christian. There are Christian Iranians, not many. Jewish, Zoroastrian, and secular, atheist, whatever you want. It wasn't Muslim, and I was predicting Muslim. Does anybody want to take another guess?
What? Jewish people?
Zoroastrians?
I think, yeah.
I wish. We didn't get one Zoroastrian.
Have they noticed all the eyes, no?
They do, but there wasn't one. And I reached out to the Zoroastrian community in Toronto, and I wished I got one.
Well, the Christian there?
No, the Christian,
Jewish.
the Baha'is.
Right,
The Baha'is were the ones that were doing most of it, yes. So there were 226 raw respondents. When you say raw, that means that there was, some of them are incomplete or something like that, but there were 226 logins. I would predict there's probably around 145 that were actually fully completed. Most of them were female. It's a younger demographic, so they're around 39 years of age. Although people, there were 2 people that said over 50 because they didn't want to give their specific age to identify themselves, even though it was anonymous, but so we'll say 39. Majority are educated, so highly educated sample. Again, most of them were born in Iran, so about 93 to 51. Some chose to decline to answer this, and most of them identified as Baha'is. The shocker was then the next one was Christians, and I said, what? How is this making any sense? So I thought about it, and I said, well, how would I explain this? First and foremost, there is an Iranian Christian community in Ontario. So we have to understand, yes, there are Iranian Christians. And if I forget to talk about the Iranian Constitution, remind me, because the Iranian Constitution provides for Christians. I thought that yes, there is Iranian Christians, but we also maybe forgot to include 2 things. One, there could be converts. There could be people that maybe weren't able to practice Christianity as much as they like in Iran, so they converted to Christianity in Canada. The other possibility was that they might have come from mixed parentage, because the study required that only one of your parents had to be Iranian. So if the father was Anglican and the mother was Iranian Shia, then the kid is going to be Anglican, maybe. Okay, so that is something to keep in mind. The Muslims, I didn't see a lot of Muslims. And my theory on this was, I think a lot of them either were a little bit concerned about participating, or maybe had views that they thought might not be politically correct and didn't want to say that. So there's something that is called social desirability, where when you do surveys, people will essentially tell you what you want to hear. So, what do you think about the treatment of behind closed doors? They say, well, if they would only ease up on it, that's could be part of the reason. And then there were nuns, not nuns as in Catholic nuns, but nuns as in people that don't believe in any type of religion, atheists, agnostics, secularists, and there were a few people that declined. So it was an interesting study to see played out, but you got a rich, it's a sizable sample, so it's not bad at all. You did get a rich sample. Now, these are the 5 major questions that I asked here. What are the religious reasons for the persecution of Baha'is in Iran? What are the political reasons for it? Recognition in the Iranian Constitution, I'll get to that. Should Baha'is have the right to attend universities and colleges? And this was suggested to me by a member of the Baha'i community in Windsor. What role will the Baha'is play in the future of Iran? And I kind of read that as, if in the event that the Islamic Republic were to collapse, what role would the Baha'is play? It's an interesting question. It's a good way to end a survey. So I want to go through this very briefly, and then I'll open the floor for some questions here. What are the religious reasons for the persecution? Well, the religious reasons are basically that they are heretics and they're apostates. It kind of sounds like something out of the Middle Ages, right? Heretical, they've created a version of Islam that is not the Orthodox version, or they have a left Islam and are now dealing with something else. So this was a very popular response, although the words heretics and apostasy weren't exactly said. Several respondents pointed out that they rejected the seal of the prophets. In other words, that Muhammad is the last prophet. They believe in several others that followed him. And of course, this idea of the 12th Imam, whereas in Shia Islam, the 12th Imam is not manifested himself, again, rather he remains an occultation. But in the Baha'i faith, the 12th Imam has come back in the form of the Bab. Another issue is the rejection of the religious hierarchy. Remember when I said to you, and Baha'is, and many of the individuals pointed out to this, they said, look, we don't believe, or Baha'is don't believe, in a religious hierarchy. Iran is based on a religious hierarchy. The head of the Iranian government is not an elected prime minister or president, it is a grand ayatollah. And this is something that is a concern to the regime. And this is another point which will lead into the next point. The Baha'i faith is seen as a Western importation to Iran. It's got a lot of Western ideas. Democracy, diversity. These are foreign to Iranian society. Historically foreign to Iranian society. These are imports from Europe. and the Enlightenment that happened in Europe during the 18th century. So these are some of the religious reasons. Now the political reasons, I knew one of these political reasons was going to come up. I predicted this one too. The state ideology. Remember, in Iran, you're a theocracy. So the laws of God are the laws of the land. The laws of the land are the laws of God. And the Baha'is are simply challenging, at least what is perceived to be a challenge to this authority. Another issue that was mentioned by the participants was the Baha'is provide a nice scapegoat. So when something bad happens in Iranian society, blame the Baha'is. Just like, one of my other areas that I teach in is on anti-Semitism. And, I teach about anti-Semitism. And students say, sir, why are they always blaming the Jews? I said, it's a convenient scapegoat, historically, from antiquity to now, to blame the Jews. Who else is going to protect them? And the same thing with the Baha'is. Who's going to protect the Baha'is in Iran? Nobody's going to speak out for them in Iran. So it's a nice scapegoat. If the economy is down, the Baha'i did it. If we have a war with Iraq, which they did in the 1980s, it was the Baha'is. If there was an assassination attempt against the Shah, and there are many assassination attempts, it was a Baha'i plot. Baha'is, Baha'is, Baha'is. So it's an excellent in the sense of convenient, from a very Machiavellian way of looking at it, scapegoat, and also distraction. To show why things are falling apart in Iran, you blame somebody else. And this one was no shock to me. As someone who studies Jewish-Christian relations, when in doubt, I've taught my students, historically, people blame the Jews, okay? And that's what happened right here. A lot of people in the survey pointed out that the Baha'i faith is politically associated with Israel. And the connection to that is because the major sites of the Baha'i faith are in Israel. Hence, the Baha'is and the Israelis and the Jews and the Western world are all in cahoots against Iran. So there is this idea of a quote-unquote Zionist Baha'i plot. And as you know, Iran has a pretty bad relationship with Israel and vice versa. And this is seen as, the Baha'is are seen as spies for Israel because the headquarters of the faith are located in Israel. So this came up quite a bit. And as I mentioned, as someone who studies things like anti-Semitism, Jewish-Christian relations, blaming the Jewish people is a stereotype and something that comes up multiple times. I originally wanted to ask, do you think that the Baha'is should be granted a seat in the Mejlis, just like the other religious minorities of the country? The NSA said, we appreciate the question, but the answer is going to be no, because we cannot have any political involvement whatsoever. We get what you're saying. You're thinking like a good political scientist would, that if these three religious minorities have a seat, then the Baha'i should have a seat too. But we don't want a seat at all. So I said, okay, how would you rephrase that? Well, we just want to be recognized in the Constitution, never mind having a political seat, for having rights and freedoms like everybody else would. So that was the question that I asked. And I said, do you think that Baha'i should be recognized in the Iranian Constitution? And obviously many people said, yes, they should be. Because first and foremost, they're paying taxes, right? If you pay taxes, you should have representation. I think that's a rule somewhere. But that's not the case in Iran. And it was repeated, although nobody really said that they should have a seat at the table, it was repeated that they were the largest non-Muslim minority at the table in Iran, and as a result should be recognized in the Constitution and granted rights and freedoms, such as the right to attend university, the right for protection under the law, which is something that they don't have. But this question was very fascinating to me because it was the one that had to be revised because of the political, as you mentioned, the political question, that the Baha'is do not seek political office. And that goes in Iran, that goes in Canada, that goes in everywhere. Now this question really was important, if I can get to it, was attending university. As I mentioned, Baha'is are not permitted to attend university because they have to admit on the application form that they come from one of the four recognized religions in Iran. This is something where I think all participants of all religious backgrounds were supportive of, that yes, Baha'is do have a right to education. This is a basic human right. And they noted, which I found very interesting, that this is not harming the Baha'is alone. This is harming the entire country. When you have a population that is not educated, you have a problem, because then what role are they going to play in society? Obviously, they will be qualified for certain jobs, and Iran needs people that are highly qualified. Remember, after the Iranian Revolution, there was a huge expatriate population that fled, many of whom fled to Canada. A lot of them fled to the United States, particularly the Los Angeles region, because they wanted nothing to do with the regime. So this is something that it was very interesting. And I should note that the homeschooling, you're saying, well, Baha'is can teach from home. Yes, but they also receive persecution and harassment from the government. It is also illegal to teach from home. What the Iranian government is trying to do here is called what's called a social death. They want to cause a complete social death of the Baha'is, so they don't have any access to healthcare, education, protection under the law. And this is a way of forcing them to either leave the country, which is probably what they don't want, or what they really want is them to convert to Shia Islam. And this was the last question to end the survey, which was, what role do they play in the future? And this was suggested to me by a member of the Baha'i community in Windsor. He says, John, you could do what you want, but why don't you ask, what about the future in all this? What role are they going to play in the future of Iran? Most of them indicated that there is really no future of the Baha'is in Iran unless the current government comes to an end, because there is no reasoning with this current government. I thought that was a fair response. Several respondents said that the Baha'is will come to help reintegrate Iran with the world. As you know, Iran is kind of seen as a pariah state, so to speak. It's been isolated, it's been sanctioned over the years. Canada doesn't even have a diplomat, an ambassador there anymore, and vice versa. So it suggested that the Baha'is would help with that reintegration component. And then there was a few that said, I don't know. It's a good question, actually, what role the Baha'is are going to play in the future of Iran. As I mentioned, it's not going to be a political role. It might be a social role, a religious role, an educational role, or something along those lines, because the politics is not something that's integral to the Baha'i faith. I want to close with a quote from Abdul Baha, who was the son of Baha'u'llah. And he said, "The future of Iran is of the utmost greatness, majesty, and glory, for it is the native land of the blessed beauty. All the nations of the earth will turn to it and regard Iran with the highest esteem. Now of a certainty that it will make such progress as to dazzle the eyes of the mighty and the learned throughout the world." So it's interesting that even the son of the Baha'u'llah had something to say about the future of Iran, and it's something that's going to be great, it's going to be glorious, it's going to be majestic, and that all the nations will turn to and regard with great esteem. So that's the presentation. I want to thank you all for your time, and I'm very happy to answer any questions that people might have. But before I open up the floor to questions, I want to draw your attention to 1, 2, and 3. If you have Facebook, follow us. If you have Twitter, follow us. And now we have Instagram. It was just a few weeks ago we switched from the light bulb to the candle to the light bulb. So now we're on Instagram as well. But I encourage you to follow us on Facebook. We have a lot of activities. And I thank you very much for your time.